Section 1. The legacy of my father's garden. When my father passed away, it felt like the world had gone gray. He wasn't just a parent, he was a decorated Marine veteran, a man who'd given his entire life to service, to discipline, and to honor. Our family ranch sat on the edge of town, right where the hills rolled into pine forests and the sunsets painted the sky like fire. After his funeral, I decided to dedicate a piece of our land to him, not just a small marker, but a living memorial. A garden filled with his favorite flowers, a bronze plaque engraved with his name and rank, and a flagpole that flew the same stars and stripes he once carried into battle. It was more than a garden, it was his spirit alive in the soil. For the first year, it became a sacred space for me, my wife, and our neighbors who respected his service. Veterans from the nearby VFW hall would stop by sometimes to place flowers, salute, or just sit quietly on the stone bench beneath the oak tree. Kids from the community came to learn about honor and sacrifice. Even people I'd never met would pause along the roadside to admire the rows of crimson roses and blue irises we'd planted to match the colors of the flag. But not everyone saw it that way. The Homeowners Association had always been a thorn in everyone's side, but when Karen became HOA president, it became a nightmare. She was the kind of woman who lived for control, the sort who thought every blade of grass should be cut to regulation height and every mailbox painted the same dull beige. Power, even the smallest taste of it, went straight to her head. Her word wasn't just a suggestion. She treated it like law. At first, she ignored the memorial garden. But as people started visiting, leaving flags, candles, and tokens of respect, she began complaining. "It's not uniform," she'd say, waving her clipboard. "It violates HOA aesthetic guidelines." Then she'd mutter about how patriotic displays should be limited to holidays only. I tried reasoning with her. I explained that the memorial sat on my private property outside the HOA's jurisdiction. I even showed her the land survey that confirmed the garden wasn't subject to their regulations. But Karen wasn't interested in facts. What she hated wasn't the garden, it was that people admired it. To her, it was an eyesore because it wasn't hers to control. Soon, the letters started coming. Unapproved structure. Unauthorized signage. Possible violation of HOA landscaping policy. Every week, there was a new notice taped to my mailbox or slipped under my door. My wife would tear them up before I saw them, hoping to spare me the anger. But I knew. Karen was testing us, trying to make us bend. Then came the day she crossed the line. I was watering the roses one morning when she marched up the driveway with two other board members behind her, both carrying cameras and clipboards. Without even greeting me, she started taking photos of the garden, the flag, the flowers, even the plaque with my father's name on it. "What are you doing?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "Documenting violations," she said coldly. "This display exceeds the acceptable decorative area for front-facing lots. You've been warned multiple times." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "That's my father's memorial," I said. "He fought for this country so people like you could live free enough to complain about flowers." She smirked, that same smug twist of the lips she used when she thought she was untouchable. "This neighborhood has rules for a reason," she replied. "You don't get special treatment because of sentimentality." Sentimentality. That word hit harder than any bullet. Before I could speak, she turned and motioned to the others. "We'll discuss fines at the next meeting," she said. "You'll receive notice by mail." As they left, one of the older board members, a kind man named George who'd served in Vietnam, lingered for a moment. He gave me a look that said, "I'm sorry. I don't agree with her." Then he followed her down the road. That night, I sat by the garden alone. The wind moved through the flowers like whispers, and I could almost hear my father's voice, steady calm, the way he used the sound when things got tough. "Hold the line, son. Never surrender what's right." From that day on, I knew Karen wouldn't stop. She wasn't satisfied with control, she wanted submission. And when she realized she couldn't intimidate me with fines or letters, she'd look for something worse. It started small. Someone trampled the flowers one night, not much, just enough to damage the neat symmetry. Then the American flag went missing from the pole, only to be found later dumped near the storm drain. When I reported it to the HOA, Karen brushed it off. Probably kids, she said with a fake smile. You shouldn't leave things out where they can attract trouble. But the trouble was always aimed at me. I installed cameras, lights, even motion sensors. Each time, Karen sent another violation notice claiming I needed HOA approval for security fixtures. My wife begged me to let it go, but I couldn't. My father's memory deserved respect, not harassment. Then, one afternoon, I came home to find Karen standing by the edge of the garden again, this time talking to a group of residents. She was gesturing at the flowers, pointing to the small plaque, and shaking her head like it was some kind of public nuisance. I walked straight toward her, and she smiled sweetly. "Oh, don't worry," she said. "We're just discussing a possible community redesign. Maybe something a little more modern, less militaristic." I clenched my jaw so hard I thought my teeth would crack. "You touch this garden," I said quietly, "and I'll make sure every news outlet in the state knows what kind of people you are." Her smile faltered, but only for a second. "Threats don't work on me," she said. "Rules do." I didn't know it then, but she'd already decided to break every rule there was. And the next time I saw my father's memorial garden, it wouldn't be standing, because Karen and her warped sense of power was about to cross a line so unforgivable that even the Marine in me would struggle to show mercy. Section 2. The night the flames rose, it happened on a Saturday night. The kind of night when everything feels quiet before something terrible happens. The sky was low and gray, and the wind carried a strange, restless chill. My wife and I had just gotten home from a veterans fundraiser downtown. We were exhausted but happy, glad to be surrounded by people who respected what my father had done for this country. We didn't know that while we were shaking hands and sharing stories, something evil was brewing right here at home. Around midnight, the dog started barking. Not his usual bark. This was frantic, terrified. I got up fast, still half asleep, and glanced out the window. That's when I saw it, a flicker of orange dancing against the dark sky. For a split second, my mind didn't process it. Then I realized what I was seeing, flames, rising from the direction of the memorial garden. I sprinted out the door barefoot, the gravel cutting into my feet, shouting for my wife to call 911. The smell hit me before I even got there, burning wood, melted metal, and the sickening stench of gasoline. The roses my wife and I had planted for my father were already gone, swallowed by the fire. The flagpole was engulfed, sparks snapping into the wind. The bronze plaque, the one etched with my father's name, glowed red-hot under the inferno. I grabbed the nearest hose, trying to fight it, but the flames were too strong. Someone had doused the whole area in accelerant. This wasn't an accident. This was arson. By the time the fire department arrived, it was too late. The garden, my father's memorial, was reduced to blackened earth and twisted metal. The firefighters worked fast to stop the blaze from spreading the house, but I just stood there, numb, watching the last pieces of his legacy burn away in front of me. My hands were shaking, my chest tight. My wife tried to pull me back, but I couldn't move. The fire chief came over, his face grim. "You smell that," he said, kneeling near the ashes. "Gasoline. Somebody did this on purpose." I didn't need him to tell me who. Karen had been quiet for the last week, too quiet. I'd seen her car slow roll past my driveway more than once. And just 2 days ago, I'd found another HOA violation letter in my mailbox claiming the memorial was unapproved landscaping and a community hazard. I'd laughed it off then. But now it was clear she wasn't threatening me with fines anymore. She wanted to erase what she couldn't control. As the firemen packed up, I noticed something glinting in the dirt near the edge of the property, a small, melted piece of plastic. When I picked it up, I realized what it was. Part of a gasoline container handle, still wet with residue. There were footprints too, small but deep, the kind left by pointed dress shoes. I'd seen them before, clicking down HOA meeting halls. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the porch until dawn, watching the smoke drift into the morning fog. Every time I blinked, I saw my father's face, proud, calm, the man who taught me that real strength wasn't in fighting battles, but standing for what's right. And for the first time since he died, I felt I'd failed him. The next morning, the neighborhood buzzed with gossip. Some people were genuinely horrified. Others, the ones who'd always followed Karen like sheep, pretended not to know anything. By noon, she showed up herself, standing at the edge of the driveway, fake sympathy plastered across her face. "Oh my goodness," she said, her voice dripping sugar. "What a tragedy. Such a shame about your display." "Memorial," I corrected, stepping closer. She tilted her head. "Of course. Memorial. Well, accidents happen. Accidents don't smell like gasoline." I snapped. Her smile faltered for just a second before she recovered. "You can't seriously be implying—" "I'm not implying," I said, voice low and shaking with rage. "I'm telling you. You did this." Her eyes went cold. "Careful with your words. Accusations like that can get you in trouble." I took another step toward her, and for the first time since I'd known her, she backed up. "You crossed a line you can't come back from." I said, "That garden was my father's legacy. You wanted control? You just declared war." Karen turned and walked away without another word, but her hand was trembling as she gripped her clipboard. That night, I called my old Marine unit. My brothers, men who knew what it meant when someone desecrated a fallen soldier's memory. I didn't even have to explain, they heard it in my voice. Within 48 hours, half a dozen of them drove in from different states, ready to stand by me. The fire marshal's report came in 2 days later, confirmed arson, accelerant traces found, multiple ignition points. Whoever did it knew what they were doing. But it was what came next that changed everything. The security camera from across the street. My neighbor George, the Vietnam vet who'd always supported us, had quietly installed cameras facing his property line after someone vandalized his fence months back. When he heard about the fire, he checked the footage. He called me over that afternoon, and when the video started playing, my blood turned to ice. At 11:42 p.m., less than half an hour before I saw the flames, a dark SUV pulled up near my fence. Out stepped a woman in a light coat and heels, carrying 2 large red containers. Even through the grainy footage, the shape of her face, the short blonde hair, the rigid posture, it was unmistakable. Karen. She poured, turned, and walked away calmly, like she'd just watered her flowers. I felt my fists clench, so tight my nails dug into my palms. My old unit, standing behind me, watched in silence. Nobody said a word. Nobody needed to. One of them, Ramirez, finally spoke. "She didn't just burn your garden, brother. She burned his honor." I nodded slowly, breathing hard. "Then it's time we remind her what Marines do when someone disrespects one of our own. We didn't raise our voices. We didn't storm off in rage. We planned, carefully, quietly, because if Karen wanted a war, we were about to give her one she'd never forget." Section 3, the Siege of Truth. We did not answer arson with arson. We answered it the way a unit answers an order, precisely, together, and with planning that left no room for whim or mistake. The first thing we did was lock everything down so Karen couldn't twist the narrative. George retrieved every camera clip he had and handed hard drives to Sam, who'd become our unofficial legal point man, while I and 2 Marines went door to door taking statements from anyone who'd seen Karen's SUV that night, anyone who'd been spoken to in the weeks before, anyone who remembered an odd request or a late-night visit. What surprised me most, and it should have surprised no one who's ever served, was how quickly people who had been cowed into silence by a clipboard found their voices when someone stood beside them and said, "I believe you." The accounts came in like a steady tide. The landscaper who'd been asked to tidy up by Karen the day before the fire, a young mother who'd seen Karen's husband near the green carrying suspicious boxes, the mail carrier who remembered an unfamiliar van idling by the curb. Each small memory was a stitch in the seam of proof. Sam took those statements, swore them into affidavits, and then sent copies to the county arson task force and to a state attorney who'd shown an unusual willingness to take HOA corruption seriously. He also filed emergency motions to preserve evidence and to prevent anyone from shredding records, because, as we all knew, people with something to hide tend to make paper disappear. While Sam handled the legal net, the Marines did what Marines do best. We gathered facts with military discipline. Two of my brothers, both former Intel NCOs, trawled public records and found a chain of odd payments from the HOA account into a private vendor. Another tracked cell tower pings to place Karen's phone near my property at the time of the blaze. We did not publish this information on social media or wave it like a banner. We handed it to the investigators. We set up a rotation with neighbors to sit quietly in the evenings, not to threaten, but to make sure anyone who tried to tamper with evidence would have to do it with witnesses watching. I know how that reads on the page, but there's nothing extra legal about neighbors watching their own street at night. It's community stewardship, and it kept Karen from moving freely the way she had before. Meanwhile, Sam used the subpoena power he'd convinced the prosecutor to pursue and demanded the HOA's bank records. What came back wasn't a single cashier's error. It was a pattern: invoices for special landscaping that paid out double deposits into an account registered under a shell company with Karen's maiden name, payments to a contractor who had no office and no workers, and reimbursements for event supplies that matched dates Karen had been seen near the memorial. The auditor's eyebrows rose behind the numbers, and the state attorney's desk filled with a stack of documents that looked a lot like a case. The arson investigators, who had been cautious at first because proving intent is never easy, suddenly had corroboration beyond the melted plastic and the swirl of accelerant. Motive. When you can link financial gain and a deliberate attempt to erase a memorial that inconvenienced your plan for redevelopment or for reclassification of that plot, motive stops being conjecture and starts being a line of inquiry with a name on it. We took nothing for granted. My unit worked with the county's fire investigators to run enhanced testing on the soil and the fragments we'd collected. The lab results came back with accelerant signatures that matched the model of containers sold at a store where Karen had been seen buying a large pack the week prior. That was the kind of circumstantial hook prosecutors love, because it reduces the wiggle room of maybe into a much narrower probably. Sam handed that report to the state attorney and asked for an expedited grand jury review. The DA did not disappoint. Within days, a subpoena went out to Karen's bank and phone carrier. Her husband, the nervous man we'd watched from the cameras, was called in for questioning. When the deputies confronted him with the paper trail, he folded. Fear, it turned out, has a different shape than arrogance. He agreed to cooperate in exchange for a leniency plea and revealed details that put Karen at the scene and at the center of a little empire of fines and favors. But we didn't rely on confessions alone. We staged a public accounting of facts in the only place Karen used to control the conversation, the community meeting. Sam arranged a well-advertised, properly noticed special session of the HOA that could not legally be canceled by her. He invited the press, the county auditor, the arson investigator, and he invited the neighbors. For weeks, she had used closed-door rulings and whispered fines to make people small, so we did the opposite. We played the footage of her van on the big screen. We showed the bank transfers, the invoices with forged signatures, the landscaper's statement that he'd been pressured to tidy up the memorial the day before the fire. We did it with calm voices and clear files. It was surgical. People who had been afraid to sign anything now stepped up to the microphone and added their names to the record. Homeowners who'd paid phantom fees, elderly residents who'd been told they'd be fined for flag displays, a teacher whose class had been denied permission to hold a Remembrance Day at the garden because, according to Karen, it might gather a crowd. That night, the room shifted, the air cleared. Where once there had been politeness and paralysis, there was now outrage and a demand for accountability. The press picked up the thread and ran with it. There is a peculiar power in light. Put a corrupt operation under public eyes, and the people who enable it suddenly get very busy protecting themselves. Karen, who had always used the HOA's opacity as armor, found herself the subject of editorials and local TV segments. When the county commissioner called a formal review of HOA practices and asked for a full audit of our community's accounts, Karen's phone calls went unanswered. Her favorite defense, that she was only enforcing standards, began to sound thin on the nightly news when juxtaposed with images of charred roses and the granite plaque we'd bandaged and saved. There were moments when it felt almost too good to be true. a sheriff's deputy knocking on her door, a federal agent requesting records, the HOA's board members, once cowed, signing affidavits. But we remained deliberate. Sam insisted that every step be documented, every witness sworn, every transfer traced so that there would be no murky corners for her counsel to hide behind. He filed a civil suit for intentional destruction of property and emotional distress and handed the state a criminal package that included arson, fraud, and conspiracy. The grand jury returned an indictment. I remember the day the sheriff placed that indictment in Karen's mailbox. Her face was a study in white. Not the rage I'd expected, but a stunned, small, betrayed expression that comes when someone realizes the script has flipped. We never once threatened violence. We didn't need to. Our unit's presence, our evidence, and our willingness to stand openly beside the grieving family offered protection and made obstruction harder. When Karen's husband testified against her in court, his voice shaking as he recounted meetings where his wife insisted something must be done with that memorial, it nailed another plank into her coffin. The judge issued a temporary restraining order preventing her from holding HOA meetings or accessing HOA funds. The bank accounts were frozen pending forensic audit, and the local paper ran a headline that read, simply "Memorial burned, HOA president indicted." There were nights after that when I sat in the rebuilt garden and listened to the cicadas and felt the weight of what we'd done. We had not avenged the garden with violence. We had done the harder thing. We had gathered truth until it could not be denied, and we had used the law and the court of public opinion to remove the shield she'd wrapped herself in. The Marines among us grinned at each other in that way men do when a mission goes the way it should, quietly, with no fanfare, ready for the next task. The ones who'd once been too afraid to speak now testified under oath. The contractor, who'd been paid by Karen's shell company, admitted to forging timesheets. The auditor returned the misappropriated funds to an escrow account designated to rebuild the memorial and to compensate victims of Karen's fines. The county placed a receiver to oversee the HOA until a new, transparent board could be elected. By the time the arraignment came, Karen's empire had been reduced to a folder filled with subpoenas and a handful of allies who declined to be seen in public. She sat in the courtroom looking like someone who had been unmasked. The judge read the charges aloud: arson, insurance fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and the word indicted landed in the room like a verdict already written. As Karen was led away in handcuffs, the Marines and I stood together at the courthouse steps while neighbors wept and hugged. We had not burned anything in revenge. We had burned her lies away with the slow, relentless heat of truth. The memorial might have been scarred, but my father's name was back on center stage, and the people who had tried to erase him were now the ones whose names would be read aloud by investigators for years to come. Section 4, Justice, Rebirth. And the legacy: she couldn't touch the day the verdict came down. The courtroom was so still you could hear the hum of the lights. Karen sat there in her press suit, hands trembling, face pale, beneath the makeup that couldn't hide what she'd become. The jury foreman stood, cleared his throat, and read each word slowly: guilty of arson, guilty of fraud, guilty of conspiracy. Each count landed like a hammer strike, steady and final. When the judge sentenced her to 15 years, there was no cheering, only the soft exhale of relief from every neighbor she had tormented for years. My Marine brothers stood behind me, silent but proud, like a formation that had seen the mission through to its end. After the sentencing, we walked together to what was left of the memorial garden. It was a quiet evening. The mountain air smelled of pine and smoke long since gone. The county had already approved our plan to rebuild it, this time bigger, brighter, and made of stone that fire couldn't easily touch. Local veterans, school children, and families came out with shovels and flowers. My father's old unit donated a bronze plaque that read, "You can destroy a place, but not the reason it was built." Karen's house didn't stay hers for long. The court ordered her HOA salary and assets seized to pay restitution. Her property, once a symbol of power, was auctioned off, and the proceeds went straight into rebuilding the memorial and funding a veteran scholarship in my father's name. Fitting, I thought that the same arrogance that led her to destroy a hero's memory would now pay to educate the next generation of heroes. When the new garden finally opened, the entire town showed up. The Marines formed a small honor guard. The mayor spoke, but his words faded behind the simple moment that followed. When I planted a single rose at the center of the garden, in the exact spot where the fire had started, it wasn't for revenge or victory. It was for peace. As the sun set over the mountains, I looked at the rebuilt memorial, stronger than before, alive with color and life, and realized that Karen had never truly won anything. She burned something beautiful trying to erase it, but all she did was make the whole town remember why it mattered. Her name would fade from memory, buried under the weight of her own choices. But my father's name, his story, and the spirit of every soldier that Garden honored, that would stand forever. And as I stood there, the Marine insignia glinting in the last light of day, I whispered, "Mission accomplished, Dad.